Okay, everybody, if we can get seated, we'll be getting started shortly. Did you work? Yep. Oh, yeah, yes. Oh, no, I'm fine. I got the clicker. And if any of you are hot, Catherine's checking on that in terms of the building to see if we can cool it down a little bit. I see some applause from the back. All right. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Um, yes. Thank you. Thank you so much. Now, I am fully aware that I am standing between you all and happy hour, so I'm going to definitely try to get us out of here at 4:30. So let's get started. We're in Module 3, Management Rights, and then we're going to go through an introduction of what management rights are, and then we'll talk about procedures and appropriate arrangements. Okay, so you know we are on Module 3. And this is a recap of Module 2. We did go through the negotiability checklist. Catherine did a fantastic job talking about consistency of the proposal with law, rule, or regulation. We talked about the executive orders and how the executive orders can be applied. And I think that really brings us into management rights. Now, management rights, this is a topic that I think is a favorite of labor relations professionals. I think we love to say, that's a violation of management rights. So we're going to talk about management rights in more detail. And if everybody pulls out their checklist, you can see in 3A, it talks about basically the analysis and whether the proposal involves a deliberation on or decision to act on or not act on Section 7106A, which is a management right. And everyone can refer to your statute to learn more about the management rights and see the whole list of management rights, which we're going to go through in more detail tomorrow as far as the specific, what are those management rights that are listed in the statute. But today, we're going to talk more in terms of how management rights are used, what are management rights, and are those rights absolute, or do we have obligations under procedures and appropriate arrangements? So this is the list of management rights under the statute, and as you can see, there's a lot of management rights. And this gives management a host of basically responsibilities and as well as abilities and things that we can do, things that we have the right to determine as far as mission, budget, et cetera. And so I think we often tend to use those rights, and sometimes we might get a little carried away, I think, with the rights, to where at the table you might have heard it said, oh, this is a violation of management rights, so we don't have to bargain over this at all. That's not always the case. So in fact, a lot of times that's not the case. And so we're going to talk about that. First, in terms of analyzing the impact of a proposal, FLRA first looks to the meaning of the proposal. So they want to see the exact language of the proposal and whether it limits or conflicts with the management right at issue. So in other words, does it directly interfere with the right? Does it prevent the agency from performing that right? So in terms of the management right, for instance, the management right to hire, does this completely prevent management from hiring or selecting? Does this proposal prevent management from disciplining an employee? Those are the things that they look at. So any decision to act in these areas is the sole prerogative of management. So that's what we like to hear. However, this is the big but. Both procedures for exercising that authority and arrangements regarding affected unit employees are subject to negotiation. And this is the I&I bargaining we talk about a lot, impact and implementation bargaining. We had a situation where we had in our contract, our Article 8, we had basically, I'm going to go back for a moment, we had this part of the statute. and this part only. So we had all the management rights listed. The managers loved this article, and they would even pull out the contract and say, look at Article 8. We don't even have to talk to you about this because this violates our right to assign work. And so, I don't always encourage having the statute in the contract anyway. I mean, the law does speak for itself. But if you decide to put it into the contract, we talked earlier about how it can be negotiable to say you're going to follow the law. It can also be negotiable to say we want to cite the law. And sometimes it can be educational to have it in the contract. So, but if you do put it in the contract, make sure you include the entire section, which is not what we did with the NEFI contract years and years ago. I won't say what we did. I didn't negotiate this, but that's how the contract was. It basically had only the management rights, and it didn't talk about the procedures and appropriate arrangements. And so what that did is it led to a lot of confusion. It led to confusion from managers. It led to confusion even from labor relations specialists who didn't refer to the statute, and they didn't see the rest of the story. They didn't see the appropriate arrangements and the procedures, which we do have to negotiate. So it's very important to remember that caveat that you can't just say, oh, this is infringing on management's rights, so therefore we're not going to talk about anything else. It's, you have to analyze that second piece of it as far as whether there is that impact and implementation that's subject to bargaining, and we're going to talk about that. And I'll use those interchangeably, and so that's important. If you hear the terminology I&I or impact and implementation, we're talking about the procedures and appropriate arrangements that are in the statute. Okay. So one thing you might hear is the term substantive bargaining. What that means is if the intended change is not covered by a management right at all, then everything is negotiable. Basically, even whether you're going to do that or not is negotiable. And in this Puget Sound case right here, we've been talking a lot about smoking today in our cases, but this was a smoking case. And again, this is 1990. This is before the regulations on smoking. And in this particular case, that was exactly what was presented was management was trying to stop smoking in the facility. And the union was like, no, we don't agree to it. We want to keep going. We want to keep smoking. And so this turned out to be substantively negotiable at the time because there was no regulation or anything preventing that. So that is differentiated, the substantive bargaining, the union actually has the right to submit proposals saying, don't do it. You're negotiating whether or not you're going to actually take that particular action or not. That's going to be different than if it actually is protected by a management right. So if the change is protected by a management right, this is where we get a lot of confusion because we might think, okay, this change is protected by a management right, so all I have to do is say that you're infringing on management's right, you're excessively interfering with management's right, we don't need to bargain. But bargaining is likely still required if there's procedures and appropriate arrangements, or in other words, the impact and implementation of the change. That is what you need to look at, and that's what you need to evaluate. And so we're going to talk about that as far as how to evaluate the procedures and appropriate arrangements in the proposals to see if those are appropriate and negotiable. I wanted to provide some quotes here because I think that these are important, and this kind of sets the scene, I think, for bargaining, and it kind of dispels the notion that, boy, just because it violates management rights, you're done and you don't need to negotiate. And so this is a quote here from the Federal Bureau of Prisons case. An agency's decision to change a condition of employment may constitute an exercise of a management right under Section 7106 and is not negotiable. Where the substance of the decision is not itself subject to negotiation, the agency is nonetheless obligated to bargain over the impact and implementation of that decision if the resulting changes have a more than de minimis effect on conditions of employment. This is another one. You could put this up on your bulletin board in the office because this really guides all of your negotiations, I think, and all of your analysis when you're looking at I&I. And I get this question probably once a month from either management, sometimes some junior labor relations specialists, okay, where they're asking, do I need to negotiate this? This is a violation of management rights. And so this really provides the entire story. I think this quote from the Federal Bureau of Prisons that, yeah, you may still need to negotiate based on the impact and implementation. Okay, so let's look at a couple of examples here. So due to recent threats to the public to federal agencies, management decided to eliminate public access on its floor, which will require all employees to enter on a lower floor, use an electronic card, and climb one flight of stairs. Is there a duty to bargain? And this is just, by the way, this is partially hypothetical, and some of this actually happened. So let's actually meet with your table groups really briefly just to discuss this. Oh, and the follow-up question is, if there is a duty to bargain, is it substantive or impact and implementation? Okay. Okay, sorry to cut all the great discussion short, but I wanted to hear from maybe one of the tables. Does anybody have an answer to this one? I heard some great discussion. I overheard some really good comments about this. Does anybody have? Yay, thank you very much. Thank you so much.
All right, with this situation here, I would say yes, they are entitled to bargain, but it would be I and I.
Fantastic. That's exactly correct. Yeah. The table's clapping. Okay, that's exactly correct. Here, this is a management right to determine internal security practices as well as to take necessary emergency action. So that is a very sacred management right there. So we will not be bargaining the substance of this. Oh no, keep the key card available for all the public. That's not something that the union can come in and negotiate. That is a management decision. However, do we have an impact here? Yes, we do. Employees are now climbing up the stairs. They may not want to exercise in the morning, but they will be. And so there's a lot of impact on the employees in terms of having to go to a lower floor, use a key card, climb an extra flight. So this is something where we would need to go ahead and issue notice. We would not be bargaining the substance of the decision, but we would be bargaining the impact and implementation. Yes?
What if management did this on a Saturday when no one was present and everyone came into work on Monday? So then what will we be doing then?
And I'm sorry, and just to clarify, you're saying they did it, but so they came in on Monday and still had to climb the stairs?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that could be a ULP in that situation. Right. Right, no, and I mean, yeah, definitely that's something that may be proposed by management. Absolutely. Hey, why don't we do this on the weekend? And, they'll be greeted with that on Monday. But yeah, that could be a ULP, and, we want to, and I'm glad that you brought that up, though, because we do want to talk about the fact that there's been threats. So this could be an urgent situation. So maybe management felt like we need to do this immediately. So what may be appropriate in this circumstance is what's called post-implementation bargaining, where, yeah, maybe employees do come in on Monday morning and, hey, guess what? You're going to be using the stairs. We had to take immediate action. We have a threat going on right now. But then in that circumstance, what you want to do is you want to still issue notice to the union, let them know what the change was. Sorry, we had to implement immediately based on these threats. However, we would still like to bargain the procedures and appropriate arrangements with you and be open to that. And that shows the FLRA that you're bargaining in good faith, doing your best here. So I think that is a good question. All right. Management directed all employees enter and leave by the north gate for the next 90 days while temporary construction work is completed on the main entrance. The distance from the main gate to the north gate is approximately 1/2 mile. Is there a duty to bargain? Let's talk with your table groups. Mm-hmm. And if so, is it going to be substantive or I&I? Okay. All right, I see some more good discussion. But in the interest of time, we'll go ahead and stop and see if we have any brave souls who want to talk about this case and what your answer was at your table. Anyone? Do we know the agency? This is actually a bit of a hypothetical. It's a combination of a couple of cases, but there have been at least 3 cases I can think of that talked about moving the entry gate and having employees having to walk quite a way or drive, walk or drive, but in some cases walk quite a ways to an alternate entry. So. But this is a bit of a hypothetical, which might make you feel more comfortable answering because there's really no wrong answer.
What was the reason why they had to move the gate? Was it a reason that was an emergency, like a pipe burst in the street over where this gate was, or was it something that they knew about and they could have
What a
and maybe
what a great question. The question was, what caused this? Why did they need to move the gate in terms of this temporary construction? Did a pipe burst? Was it an emergency? Or was it just that, hey, management decided we want to give the building a facelift? I mean, what was it? Is it something that could be postponed? Great question. And this is a hypothetical, but I think that the case really could turn on those points. Absolutely, absolutely. Any more questions or comments about this? So I think that a reason why the case could turn on this, because that's very important, it's possible that this could be substantive bargaining. If management has no real business need for doing this construction work, then yeah, the union could say, hey, why don't you postpone this until the springtime when the weather's better and employees don't mind walking, or why don't you let us use an alternate door? Why don't you have the construction take place after hours and on weekends so we're not inconvenienced? There's all kinds of proposals that the union could come up with, especially depending on what the need is or why are we actually moving the gate. Now, if we are moving the gate due to a pipe, having burst or some kind of emergency situation, then we get into management right at this point, and now we're only in I&I bargaining. So, but either way, would there be a duty to bargain the impact and implementation? How many people think there would be? We have maybe a little over half. And then how many don't think you'd bargain this at all? Okay, we've got Don. Okay, anybody else? Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think this depends. It's another labor relations, it depends, right? So I think that, yeah, if employees are driving, there's a parking lot at the north gate, there's a parking lot at the main gate, maybe this is de minimis, and we'll get into de minimis tomorrow. But if employees are on foot, which some of the cases involve employees being on foot, there's no parking at the facility, they're walking a half a mile, this could be a lot more than de minimis. So I think in a lot of cases you might end up needing to bargain the I&I. Yes, we have a question in the back. Can you please go up to the mic? Yes, yes.
I'm from Hampton Roads originally, so there's a lot of Navy installations and Air Force bases, and many times they have had to shut down a gate for whatever reason, and it backs traffic up for miles. And so then there becomes an issue of time and attendance, and is the agency going to allow the employee to, get some administrative leave for that? So I've seen that happen before.
That's a fantastic point, and those are
Yeah.
some proposals that we may see from the union as far as the additional time that it's going to take to enter the building because of this. And like you said, admin leave or some type of forgiveness on tardiness, things like that. So yes, thank you for bringing that up. Telework, I think that's a proposal you definitely might see with this. In some agencies, exactly, in some agencies. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. We have another one. You are eliminating one break room to build a much-needed storage facility that the employees in your program area requested. Is there a duty to bargain, and if so, substantive or I&I bargaining? Please talk with your table groups. Okay. All right, I see a lot of heated discussions on this topic. Okay, so does anybody want to come up and talk about this one? Anyone want to represent the table on this particular subject? 'Cause this is one that could really go either way, I think. Yeah, definitely. But I mean, so if you have a perspective you want to share, anybody on this particular case? Again, it's a hypothetical. How about some questions or things you need to know in order to respond?
Break room in the vicinity on the same floor, how far do they have to go to another break room?
Is there another break room in the facility was the question. I think that's a fantastic question, and that really goes to when you analyze whether the impact is de minimis or not. And so, and again, we'll talk about de minimis tomorrow, but I think that's a great question. Is this the only break room in the facility? Yes.
And this particular request is being driven by employees. Is it a management directive initiative? This is something that the employees are requesting. So I think it may be more than just I&I. Or if it's not related to the mission,
Very.
the employees are just wanting to space.
So the comment there was that employees are requesting this. This does not seem to be related to some type of management need or management requirement. And so that may lead to more substantive bargaining. And yes, I would say yes, definitely. And so I think those are the key words here is that, okay, the employees requested it. We don't have any information here to suggest that this is a management need. It may be. So if management says, you know, this is a business requirement for us to have this storage area, we might be able to make that argument, but it's very difficult when you're looking at space, and it's extremely difficult when you're looking at eliminating a break room, which is definitely going to affect, it's going to have impact on bargaining unit employees. Yes? Right, so the question was, what is the use of this storage room? Is it for work files, or is it just for personal use of employees? And I think that definitely plays into it. So that's a great question, Bobby, as far as how are we going to use this storage room, and if this storage room is related to a management right in some way, like if this is needed to assign work or something like that, or to do the work of the organization, then we might be able to argue just I&I bargaining. But most likely, I would say, this is going to be substantive bargaining. You're eliminating a break room. We really haven't shown, I think it's going to be very difficult to show that this storage room is just a requirement for management. And as we pointed out, this is really an employee request, and the employee portion was actually put in there also too, because a lot of times that'll be mentioned, oh, the employees asked for this, and that doesn't mean that there's no obligation to the union, because the union may feel very differently. These employees in this particular program area may say, oh yeah, we want a storage area, but the union, they are the exclusive representative, and they're representing everybody, and so they may say no. The break room is of a better use and more appropriate for the employees as a whole. So that's why you can't just say, oh, the employees requested this, we're going to go ahead and build out. You have to make sure you're utilizing your union as the exclusive representative, and they are the ones who are going to represent the employees. Yes, Brianna?
We had a sort of a similar situation where employees were asking for something.
Oh, and would you mind, I'm sorry, stepping up to the mic, I'm sorry.
We had a similar situation where employees were asking for something, and management was on board and was like, yes, we want to do it. But we asked the union based on management's input. So I suggested to the employees that were asking for it, why don't you go talk to the union president and you tell him it's an
Absolutely.
elected position, he needs to keep his constituents happy. So if employees are asking for this, I would refer them right on down to the union office and tell them what you want. And that helped us to get it to go through very quickly. It went amazingly quickly through after that. So
Absolutely, Brianna.
It was very helpful.
I think that's absolutely the best way to do it. We had a very seasoned manager, and that was always her quote, talk to your union. That's your union. Talk to your union. And I think that's right. You really don't need to be the go-between. Your job is to work with the union. So, I mean, if employees are asking for something, they need to funnel it through the union because they're the exclusive representative. So that's absolutely right. So that is a great example. Really, this scenario brings up a lot of things, and so that's why I wanted to make sure we included this, because there's a lot of considerations and a lot of information that you need in order to make this determination. But assuming that management's not able to articulate some really strong need for this storage room that relates to a management right, this most likely is going to be substantively negotiable. Okay. All right. So 5 U.S.C. 7106B2 and B3 are seen as exceptions to management rights. So these proposals surround the procedures and appropriate arrangements for exercising management rights. They're negotiable and they're mandatory subjects of bargaining. And if you look at your handy checklist at 3B, we're going to talk about procedures. So this asks, does the proposal concern a procedure which management officials will observe in exercising a management right? So let's talk a little bit about what we mean when we say procedures. A negotiable procedure outlines a way to implement management's change, but does not directly interfere with the management right. So that's the analysis, is that it cannot directly interfere with the management right. It's a process. It's a way to do it. There's no like handy test here, like sometimes we have a two-pronged test and things like that. With procedures, it's more just a case-by-case basis. You just have to get familiar with the cases. So we're going to go through a few very quickly. We'll do a show of hands. So this proposal from the union prescribes how management would select employees for assignments. States that as long as management retained the right to determine that the available employees were equally qualified, these procedures would apply. So is this a negotiable procedure? I'll let you guys look at that for a moment. Okay, a show of hands. Who thinks this is a negotiable procedure? I have a few hands. I have, maybe a quarter of the room. Okay, how many think that this is non-negotiable? Okay, all right. So, about half and half. Anybody want to comment on this at all? So I will break the tie. This is negotiable, okay? And the key phrase here is qualified employees. Management gets to determine who is qualified and who isn't. So it's negotiable to determine what the selection process is as long as management determines the qualifications. And here's a hint. If you see proposals that state assuming qualifications are equal, or all things being equal qualifications, or management gets to determine the qualifications, at that point, the union can present proposals that are procedures such as once the qualifications are equal, the selection will be made by seniority. That's an example of a negotiable proposal. So as long as management determines those qualifications, there's a number of proposals that you may see that have to do with procedures. Like, for instance, overtime, for those of you who may have overtime. It says, okay, I'm sorry, what'd you say? Exactly, or shift bids. Shift bids is another great one. So assuming that qualifications are equal according to management's determination, now we're going to do the shift bids by seniority. That would be a negotiable proposal. So, okay. A proposal requiring that management designate a management official to participate in a performance discussion. So let's say they were using team leads or something like that, and they're saying, no, we want a management official at this performance discussion. Is this a negotiable procedure? Okay, how many people think that this is a negotiable procedure? Nobody. Oh, I got one in the back, okay. And then, thank you, okay. And then how many do not think it's a negotiable procedure? Most of the room. And I'm sorry, what's your name in the back? Lee? Lee Clark? Well, being the sole person who said this is negotiable, you're correct. You're correct. So these are shockers. These are definitely shockers. This was determined to be a procedure. And even though they're involving management, it's about a performance meeting. So this is a bargaining unit performance meeting. And basically that employee is later going to be subject to performance actions, negative performance appraisals, and it was determined that they have the right to hear from management. Also, what made this a procedure is that management still gets to designate who the management official is, and that was really key. So another little hint that you can look at when you're looking at proposals, excuse me, when you see specific individuals identified, like if they say, oh, the director of operations will be present at the performance discussion, that's going to be non-negotiable. But if they're just saying, we need a management official there at the performance discussion, management gets to pick who that is, but somebody, because this performance discussion impacts bargaining employees. That's negotiable. Yes? Oh, Clarence, I'm sorry, can you come to the mic? Oh, pass me my water. Yeah,
Are you
there we go.
suggesting
Oh,
that someone other than the first line supervisor under this proposal will have to attend a performance meeting?
Not at all, not at all. We
So
are
then the
not-
first line supervisor is considered a management official?
First line supervisor would be considered a management official. This language needs to be sufficiently broad to allow management to designate that person, and it absolutely could be a first line supervisor. Absolutely. Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. As that. Right, and I understand that, and this goes back to the classification, and really it's up to management to determine, who is defined as a management official. So, I mean, but yes, this could be a first-line supervisor, absolutely. So, yeah, and I mean, so management can meet the language of this by just sending the first-line supervisor, and it's satisfied. Okay. So again, the key is management gets to designate who the management official is. If you see specific titles, that's a red flag. Now that's when you've got a non-negotiable proposal. But this is a procedure. Okay. That was a good one. That was a good stumper. Okay. Yes, Bobby. Go ahead. Yes, a team lead would very much be impacted by that proposal because a team lead oftentimes is used by management for sort of pseudo supervisory responsibilities, and they may have been trying to use a team lead in this particular capacity, but yeah, they would be impacted because team leads are typically bargaining unit employees, and they are typically not management officials. And they typically hold no supervisory authority either. They're not designated as a supervisor usually. So yes, so they would be affected. They, That's a great question. No, the language doesn't read that way, but I'm glad you said that because if the proposal stated that certain people aren't allowed, designated by management, that could be considered non-negotiable. But this is just requiring that at least one management official be present. So it's not just going to be the team lead, for example. Yes, or some kind of designee that doesn't have a management official capability. Yes?
So I just wanted to point out, though, in the statute, though, there's definition for
definition for
supervisor
management official. Oh,
and
yes.
management official.
Official, yes,
So then
yes.
if they say management official, it almost seems like to me they're trying to exclude a supervisor.
Well, and that's something to drill down on, and I think that goes back to what Catherine mentioned about asking questions when you are going through the proposals, and so that's a good opportunity to say, are you saying that a first-line supervisor cannot attend this particular meeting? I know, like for instance, at HUD we use the management official phrase very broadly, but you could ask them, is that what you're saying? Are you attempting to exclude a first-line supervisor? And if they say yes, then as Catherine mentioned, you're going to take notes on that, and now it's non-negotiable. So you can go ahead and take that forward to the FLRA. So that's a very good point. Okay, yes.
I just had a quick question.
Yes.
Going back to that last slide, and I've seen this in contracts where you have provisions that allow a union to determine how selections are made as long as they're equally qualified candidates, and management determines that they're equally qualified candidates. But what can happen sometimes is that could be the starting point for management making a decision. They may say, okay, we've picked who the qualified candidates are, and we're trying to make a detail to a particular group, and maybe it's a small group. And for instance, maybe the personalities of that group may make a difference, and management may decide to make the determination based on that. And it just seems, I'm going to look at that case, I haven't seen it. It just seems like when the union is allowed to jump in at that point, once they determine who the qualified candidates are, management could be cut off from a pretty significant management right of making a selection decision based on other criteria after determining who the most highly qualified candidates are.
I think that's a great point, and I think management needs to be very careful what they agree to here. And this goes back to the prior module when Catherine was mentioning that just because something's negotiable doesn't mean you have to agree to it. And so there may be situations where you don't want to agree to it. I would not want to agree to a circumstance where, okay, once I get to determine the qualifications, the selection for a job is one particular person determined by the union. I would never agree to something like that. And I think more so we would be talking about utilizing this where management is like, all things being equal, I don't really care who's in this particular slot. For example, it would more be for overtime or like we talked about shift bids. So things like that. It may even be a detail, like an opportunity for a detail. We'll take volunteers and then we determine the qualifications, and then as long as those qualifications are equal, really any one of those people can go into the detail or rotate into the detail. So things like that is where you might see language like that. But I agree, if you're looking at selection for a particular position, I would not recommend any type of language saying that. So I agree with you completely. Yes. Okay, great comments. All right. Oops, okay. Here, this is a proposal that limits the evidence agencies could use to support disciplinary actions. Is this a negotiable procedure? So, by show of hands, who thinks this is negotiable? We have one. Okay, we have one. Clarence says it's negotiable. Okay, anybody else think it's negotiable? Okay, how about non-negotiable? Who thinks it's non-negotiable? Okay, we have a lot of hands there on non-negotiable. Anybody want to describe either side of that? Clarence, he wants.
So ma'am, for me, even though the agents, they proposed that, I can talk about it, but I don't have to accept that proposal. So it's okay, they can propose that to me. I don't think, to my knowledge, I don't think there's a rule, regulation, or law that says I have to use specific types of evidence. So I can, but I certainly want to accept that. But we can have that discussion all day. I know it's something I want to accept.
No, and thank you for that. And I think that is a good way of looking at it in terms of, okay, is this something I'm willing to talk about? Is this something I'm willing to discuss? And you may be able to get to language that is agreeable and that is negotiable. But actually, this was determined to not be negotiable. And this is, we're going to talk a little more tomorrow about this one because if you look at the right to discipline, there's a lot of sort of undercurrents to that. And one of those is a right to basically determine the evidence. And so this limits the evidence that management can consider, and so that is why it's non-negotiable, because it is excessively interfering with management's right to discipline. And so we'll discuss it more as far as how that plays out with discipline. But I think that is correct, and it kind of goes back to strategies. You may not want to declare this non-negotiable, even though it is. You may want to keep that in your back pocket and talk with the union about what the interests are and try to get some counter language that actually is negotiable that you can work with. So, great idea. Okay. The union presents a proposal requiring management to delay a detail until after the consolidation of 2 facilities. Is this a negotiable procedure? Okay. How many people think that this is negotiable? I'm not seeing any hands for it being negotiable. Okay. Oh, okay. Okay, we have one from, okay, we have 2 hands over here at this table. Okay. How about non-negotiable? Okay. A lot of hands. Anybody want to talk about it being non-negotiable? Does anybody want to discuss that? Yes, please.
So a detail is a fancy way of saying assignment of work.
Yes.
And so that's it, right?
That's
This is
right.
proposing to delay management, not assign work for a period of time.
That's exactly correct. That's exactly correct. So we are excessively interfering with management's right to assign work. And another thing to note here is the union may get fancy by saying delays, oh, I'm just delaying it. Even delaying a management right is still interfering with management's right, or I should say excessively interfering with management's rights. So it's important to note that even if the union proposes delaying it, that's still a problem, so that's still non-negotiable. Okay. A proposal that requires the agency to minimally qualify employees for positions in a nuclear program based on seniority. So this kind of goes a little bit back to what we were talking about before. Any thoughts here? Who thinks this is negotiable? I don't see any hands for negotiable. Oh, I see one hand. I see one hand for negotiable. Okay. Anybody else think it's negotiable? Okay. Who thinks it's non-negotiable? Most people think it's non-negotiable. Anybody want to talk about either side there? So you might remember we talked about determining the qualifications. We talked about that. Now here, the agency is being required to minimally qualify the employee. So does management get an opportunity to determine the qualifications here? No, they do not. They do not. The agency is required to minimally qualify these employees. So they have taken away management's right to determine the qualifications. So this is non-negotiable. Okay? All right. And, okay. We have a union proposal establishing the procedures that management will use in announcing or filling vacancies. Is this a negotiable procedure? And this is an important one. I heard a yes. I heard a yes. I see some nods. I heard yes. Okay. Anybody think this is not a negotiable procedure? Yes, Brianna. Anybody else think this is not a negotiable procedure? Okay. Anybody want to talk about why or why not? Okay, thank you. Are you, oh. Thought you were coming to the mic. It was a fake. It's a fake. Okay. Anybody else want to talk about it? Okay. So this is negotiable, all right? This is negotiable. And you might see these a lot in merit promotion articles. This can be very common. You might see language like management will hold the announcement open for 14 days, for example. That's negotiable. So that's really what should constitute a merit promotion article, are procedures, because management does have the right to select. So you'll find a lot of good examples of negotiable procedures in your merit promotion article. Okay. Proposal that requires agency to fill positions. Is this a negotiable procedure? I see Don Garris shaking his head no. Who thinks this is a negotiable procedure? I see no hands on this one. Okay. Who does not think this is a negotiable procedure? Okay, lots of hands, lots of hands. Anybody want to talk about that? No, I just see a lot of head shaking no. Yes, no, no. You're right, you're absolutely right. This is not a negotiable procedure. Any requirement to fill vacancies, and you may see this from the union because, you know, we get short-staffed, I know employees are overworked, and so you may see this proposal, management, fill these positions, you need to fill them now, and we're going to submit a proposal on that. But that is a management right to hire or not hire, and I think that's important. It goes both ways. So filling vacancies is part of this, and this is an exclusive management right, and this is non-negotiable. Okay. Now we're going to look at the complex appropriate arrangements. And you can see the section on appropriate arrangements is here in 3C in your checklist. And you can see it's very involved and very detailed. Unlike procedures, there are a lot of tests that you're going to look at. And so we're going to go through this to discuss how to analyze whether a proposal is an appropriate arrangement. Because the union gets a little more latitude when it comes to appropriate arrangements. And if they're able to show that their proposal is an appropriate arrangement, they can even somewhat interfere with management rights. So this is a tricky one. So in order to determine if a proposal is a negotiable appropriate arrangement, the FLRA applies a two-pronged test. It's called the Kang test. And this is from the Kansas Army National Guard, so that's what Kang stands for. And first I just want to talk about the Kang test and the Kang case. In the Kang case, that's hard to say. In the Kang case, basically the management was negotiating a RIF. And under that RIF, the proposal was regarding employees who were demoted based on a RIF. Because those of you who are familiar with RIFs, employees, basically, they might bump other employees. So once the RIF takes place, they're able to, by seniority, if they've held a previous position, bump another employee. So they may, in fact, be demoted to a grade that they held previously. And so the proposal was, in the event of a RIF and a demotion, that once all is good with the budget for the agency and once they're hiring again, that employee receive sort of first consideration for that position. And so that's what the Kang test entailed. So one of the first things you want to look at is it an arrangement? So you ask yourself, does the union identify the effects or reasonably foreseeable effects of the initial management action on bargaining unit employees? Second, does the union identify how the effects of the initial management action are adverse? And it can't be speculative or hypothetical. They really need to be able to show an adverse impact on employees. And then identify how the proposal is narrowly tailored to those bargaining unit employees to ameliorate those adverse effects. Okay. So in other words, you want to evaluate first the initial management action or exercise of management rights. So you want to look at that. Does it affect or will it foreseeably affect bargaining employees? That's the question number one. And then next, is there an adverse impact on that action? Then you're going to look at the proposal itself. Is the proposal narrowly tailored to impacted employees, bargaining unit employees, to ameliorate those adverse effects? And the FLRA has a quote. They say, the proposal must provide balm to be administered only to hurts arising from the exercise of management rights. So that's really what this is about when you're looking at arrangements. It's about sort of making those employees whole or better based on this adverse impact of management's rights. So that's really what it's about. And I think it's important to note the adverse impact because a lot of times you'll hear the union arguing appropriate arrangements and there's no adverse impact at all on employees. We had a situation where we were negotiating a transit subsidy increase and the union proposed to basically that we had to make that increase retroactive. And we were like, well, we kind of feel like you're violating management's right to determine the budget and some other things. And they said, well, this is an appropriate arrangement. But there was no adverse impact on employees. There was nothing adverse about the transit subsidy increase. So this would not be an example of a time to use an appropriate arrangement for the union. So we rejected that claim. Okay. Okay. And then the next thing you want to look at, once you've looked at, is it an arrangement? Now you want to look at, is it appropriate? So it's kind of backwards. First you start with the arrangement. Is it an arrangement? Now you look at, is it appropriate? And I want you to remember this guy with the scales. So does it excessively interfere with the management right? That's number one. And note the phrase excessively interfere. Because believe it or not, it can impact a management right. It really can when you're looking at appropriate arrangements. But does it excessively interfere? That's the requirement. That's the standard. And then does it meet the balance test? So we're going to remember this guy with the weights. Does it meet the balance test where the negative impact on the management right is outweighed by the benefit to impacted employees. So that's the balance. You know, even though it's impacting a management right, is that greater than the benefit that employees will receive from this proposal? Oh, and then I'm sorry, and then also, does it outweigh any impact on the effectiveness and the efficiency of the government is the other thing that you want to look at. So using the Kang case, for example, you want to look at, first of all, okay, does it excessively interfere with the management right? So with the Kang case, does it interfere with the management right? It does interfere with the management right. It interferes with management's right to hire from any source, right? Because in that scenario with that case, they're saying after the RIF and after these employees have been demoted, once we've got a budget and we can hire again, no, you're not going to hire from the outside. You're going to let these previously demoted employees go back to their previous position. Well, that does interfere with the management right because, you know, management does have the right to select from any source. However, does it excessively interfere with the management right? The FLRA said no. They applied this balance test, and they said, you know what, we're looking at a RIF here. And this kind of goes back to the previous slide about arrangements. Does it affect, or will it foreseeably affect bargaining employees? Yes, it does. A RIF definitely affects bargaining employees. Is there an adverse impact? Yes, there's a huge adverse impact with the RIF. In fact, under the Kang case, the FLRA was quoted as saying, next to removal from federal service, it is difficult to imagine any action with more severe impact than a demotion. So you've got a very serious adverse impact. It does affect bargaining employees, and the proposal is tailored for those employees who are impacted. Here, although it does interfere with the management right, when you apply that balancing test of the benefit to these employees who were demoted through no fault of their own, the FLRA determined that with the balance test, the union proposal basically superseded any type of impact on management's rights. So they felt like the union proposal was negotiable because those employees being returned to their previous position would be appropriate. And not only that, but we go back to the qualifications again. We know these employees are qualified for the position because they held it before. So it really was a really good analysis. I encourage you all to review the Kang case because it lays out the appropriate arrangement evaluation and analysis very well. And here's a quote from the case. The conclusion is unavoidable that what was intended was an exception to the otherwise governing management prerogative requirements of subsection A. Undoubtedly, some arrangements may be inappropriate because they impinge upon management prerogatives to an excessive degree. The authority is free to determine whether the union's proposal, albeit not invalid simply because it contravenes management rights, is nonetheless inappropriate. So that's up to the authority to decide, but just the mere fact that it does somewhat infringe on management rights, that doesn't make it non-negotiable when you're looking at appropriate arrangements. And that's a matter of going through these tests. Okay, so we'll go through these. Management is relocating its field office from San Francisco to Livermore, California. This is very close to where I live. So here, and that's kind of background information for you to know, and the union's presenting this proposal. It's a proposal that requires that management provide the same level of security in the new Livermore office as it provides in its Maryland office. Is this an appropriate arrangement? Okay. I'd like you guys to maybe talk to your table real quick. Go ahead and use your checklists and go through the appropriate arrangement analysis. Yep. This case was a good one because all right. Okay. Let's resume. There's a lot of analysis that needs to go into a proposal like this. And so I encourage everybody to pull out your checklist. Okay. So is this an appropriate arrangement? How many think that this is an appropriate arrangement? Yes. I heard a yes in the background. Anybody else? Right, okay, and that's the comment that basically wouldn't agree to it, but thinks it's negotiable and would continue negotiating. Any other comments about this? I see a shake head of no. Yes. Yes, Clarence. Yes, please. Thank you.
Ma'am, because the proposal is requiring management to do something. For who I am, don't make no proposals requiring me to do nothing. And so that's not happening. It's just not happening.
That's good to know. Definitely. Thank you, Clarence. Definitely. Great point. And that was kind of a little tricky point. And actually, the case turned on that point right there. She asked, where did they throw Maryland in there? Why did they throw Maryland in there?
She's saying that we have at least the same or better than we had before. Now you're going all the way across the country, which there are probably different threat levels based on where we're located closer to maybe DC.
Yes.
How do you throw that in there?
Right. So the comment was, how do you throw that in there? There's different threat levels for different areas. How did you throw in Maryland? And that is what the case turned on. In this particular case, this was not determined to be an appropriate arrangement. And if you go through the test, one of the things we talked about was that it has to be narrowly tailored. The proposal has to be narrowly tailored to ameliorate those effects, those harmful effects. So this is this could be an adverse effect. I think it could be, depending. Honestly, the union didn't make the argument very well to explain exactly what is the crime issue. And I can tell you from personal experience, because I live here, Livermore does not have a major crime issue. So it could even be argued that there was not an adverse impact even. But let's say that there is. Really what the case talked about was the fact that the union proposed the Maryland office, which was actually above and beyond the security level of anything they had before. So they weren't just narrowly tailoring it to whatever that issue was. They went above that and said, no, we want Maryland level security. So that is why this particular case was not an appropriate arrangement. However, it could turn very differently if they were able to show, first of all, if they had said we want it back to the San Francisco level, because that's something that they had previously, or if they were able to show we're in a high crime area in Livermore, this new area, here's some statistics, this is dangerous. Also in the case, the management actually did their homework and they were able to show that there were not a lot of crime issues in Livermore. And in fact, they had another installation already located in Livermore and there had been no crime issues to date for those employees. So this is a case that could turn very easily on how the argument is brought forward and also on how the union phrased their proposal. So had they said we just want it back to San Francisco, that may have been an appropriate arrangement. Okay, great. Okay, and then we have, this is our last one of the day. A proposal that requires that management issue formal discipline in a prompt manner only for cause, and that management consider the nature of the position occupied in the years of service. Is this an appropriate arrangement? I heard Douglas factors at that table. Yes, the union clearly read the Douglas case. Mm-hmm. Any thoughts on this one? Go ahead and talk with your table for a minute. Okay. Okay. All right. Well, to make sure we get everybody out of here on time, I will ask who thinks that this is an appropriate arrangement and therefore negotiable? Anybody? Mm-hmm. Okay, I have a hand raised back here. Yes, yes. Okay. Who does not think this is an appropriate arrangement? Okay, we have a lot of hands, yes. What's your name, sir? I'm sorry? Patrick. Would you like to explain why you feel that way, why you think it's an appropriate arrangement? He said it pretty much looks like the law right now. And I also heard a Douglas factors comment down here. It kind of looks like the Douglas factors. We have Bobby come into the mic. Yes, Bobby.
Yeah, I felt like this was meant to throw me off because there's a couple of things that I noticed. Like, yes, I do agree that this looks like the Douglas factors, but we don't use, we're not required by law to use Douglas factors for actions of misconduct less than 14 days. And we're not required to use Douglas factors for disciplines or related to poor performance. And the way this proposal reads, and no matter what the penalty, the severity of the penalty is or the type of case, poor performance or misconduct, I will always have to consider Douglas factors. And that's not what the law says.
Okay.
So I'm going with no.
Okay. And that is a really good analysis. I like how you walked through that because you're right, that is a distinction between the Douglas factors, which apply to certain levels of discipline, and this language, which would apply to all levels of discipline. So I think that is a good distinction. However, Douglas v. VA, that's case law, but that really doesn't have the same effect as actual law, rule, or regulation. So management could agree to more if you wanted to, basically. And so this actually is negotiable, and so it's an appropriate arrangement. And this doesn't mean, again, that you're going to agree to this. You may very well say, look, we're just going to stick to the Douglas v. VA case. We're going to use our Douglas factors for only those level of discipline where we're required to consider it. We're not going to apply it here. You could make that argument. You don't have to agree to it. But this was determined to be an appropriate arrangement. And if you go back to your checklist, you can look at, okay, does this affect bargaining unit employees adversely? Does discipline affect bargaining unit employees adversely? Yes, it does. And I'm going to tell you right now, anytime you see something really that's going to negatively impact employees, like discipline, like RIFs, like reorganizations that involve relocation, start to think in terms of appropriate arrangements because the proposal may involve an appropriate arrangement. Is the proposal narrowly tailored to address those impacted bargaining unit employees, those ones who are subject to discipline? Yes, it is. It's narrowly tailored because it just deals with those employees affected by discipline. And then, does it excessively interfere with management's right to discipline? It really doesn't. It impacts it, but it doesn't excessively interfere with it. Management can still discipline employees. These are just considerations for management. And then they're kind of guidelines. And then you've got that balancing test, right? So you are impacting management rights, but this benefits employees quite a bit to make sure their discipline is for just cause. So what that means is this proposal can remain on the table as a negotiable appropriate arrangement, but management may very well not agree to it. And that's a great point as far as what your analysis was. Okay. Any questions about appropriate arrangements or anything we talked about with management rights today? These are the resources, same resources that you can go to. Also, I wanted just a little housekeeping. I know we've had some comments about the heat, and we do have fans that will be here tomorrow. Basically, they're not used to it being so warm right now outside, so there's no air conditioning on right now, and so that's what the issue is, but we will have fans available tomorrow, so don't worry, and thank you for your patience today. Thank you for attending, and tomorrow we have 3 more great modules, and we look forward to seeing you then at 9 a.m. Oh, and can you leave the stuff here? The room, okay, so the room will not be locked, so that's just up to you. Like if you want to leave your materials and you feel like nobody's coming for your materials, then that's fine, but I wouldn't leave any laptops or personal belongings. Thank you, everyone.